Hey, Emma, welcome to the Intentional Wellbeing Podcast. Grateful, super grateful that you're joining me today from the UK. How's it going?
I'm doing really good, thank you. I'm really happy to be joining you on the podcast and having this chat at this interesting moment in history. So
In
yeah,
time, I
yeah.
I got to tell you, I met Emma. Probably going on maybe 5 years. I want to say 2017, maybe 2018. The pandemic confuses my timeline because I know for 2 years I was in a holding pattern, but I'll give you a little bit of intel or feedback. We met at a studio in London where I was teaching about equity, diversity, and accessibility in yoga. And we met. And what I love to hear from you is we have kind of a similar background in terms that we're both from the Caribbean. Emma identifies as Caribbean, Jamaica specifically, and white British. She's a yoga nidra teacher. She's an Afro spiritual researcher. She mentors. And like me, she's a big fan of being in nature, walking. I call myself a tree hugger. I'm going to invite you to be a tree hugger, a sea seeker, a bird watcher, a sun worshiper, like all the things that allow us to be in nature. And I have watched you evolve over time into a advocate or ally or even a mentor for BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color and other people of color, holding space for healing, holding space or encouraging healing. And this has been really interesting to me because we do very similar work. And I love your identities because you have that identity of understanding Caribbean culture from your Jamaican background. And you have that, you walk that fine line in having white British culture as part of your identity. And I love talking to people who have mixed ethnicity. My children will have, I'm Canadian born, as you were British born, right? I'm Canadian born. And my kids, their dad is full Canadian and white. And we really celebrate Bajan culture. My kids have been to Barbados several times. My mom teaches them about the culture because I think it's important that they know where they come from. And I'm a proud Black mom, so I'm very pro-Black in the household. I grew up at a time where it wasn't really fashionable to be pro-Black. It might be dangerous. It might cause you harm. So my parents were really careful to, if you will, tread lightly because they were told kind of to tread lightly. So I'm pushing back against treading lightly in life and speaking out, and you are as well. So I love people who are up to disrupting the narrative and speaking truth to power. And you do that beautifully, Emma. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was really reflecting on our time when we met. You know, things have changed so dramatically in the world, and
it's a whole new world.
You know, we've obviously had Black Lives Matter in that time period as well, and that's really changed a lot for many people within the Black community, the BIPOC community, and there is a significant change in speaking up and not staying quiet. You know, this safety in we must keep quiet, not too much disruption, and that's definitely changed for the better.
That's over. I agree. And I kind of feel that that was the place that our ancestors were at because for safety reasons and also for colonial conditioning and white supremacy conditioning. There were a few that were very outspoken and spoke back or pushed back against those narratives. But there are a lot of us who were traumatized and were scared and did not push back, which, as we know, has created a lot of, even when you do push back, generational trauma. And part of our intentional well-being is to unpack that generational trauma and to speak up. And I always tell folks, we learned a lot from our ancestors and we are passing the torch forward, but we are not our ancestors. So we will be speaking up and we will be pushing back. And we will be standing on the shoulders of our ancestors who felt powerful enough to do that. Some were murdered. A lot of people were, made, a lot of them were murdered. A lot of them were made examples of, but it's a new space and a new time. And we want to continue the legacy of speaking up, speaking out, and speaking truth to power, no matter how many people try to push us down with their colonial mindset and without doing their own self-study, if you will, around their connections to the delusion of white supremacy and colonization.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I think it's really important, the thing about safety and speaking up, because as you said, many of our ancestors were brutally murdered, tortured, and I mean every people who were colonized, they have this same violence that they may not even be able to articulate verbally. Maybe the families may not have even discussed it. However, we know within our bones that it's not safe to speak up, because many of our ancestors would have spoke up and they would have experienced things that we can't even begin to understand. So, I suppose it's recognizing the compassion that we have to have for ourselves, that yes, we're going to be scared,
Yes.
and yes, it's very, very difficult. And at times you're not going to be able to speak up, and that's okay. If you're not safe, you don't have to speak up. So, sometimes you think, oh, I wish I'd have said this to this person, and I wish I had,
Yes.
why didn't I do this? But it's not always possible to speak up. We're not always safe, and that's still the reality in today. And it may not be to the extreme, as our ancestors going back.
Yes.
Even just 50 years, but it's still...
I would even say even just 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, even now,
Yes.
there is still, violence towards people. We've had a shooting in the UK towards a black man, so
yes,
it's still not
I saw that.
safe. We're not as safe as if we were white, navigating society. So we have to really look after ourselves, because it does make us feel scared and triggered. It's not easy.
It isn't easy to walk around the world with brown skin, and it can be extremely traumatizing, because there's never anywhere where you can feel 100% safe unless you're at home with your folks, or you're in groups of people in the community that look like you and can identify with you. I find some of the scariest spaces is when I'm the only outwardly presenting person of color. And I've been in spaces where there have been other people of color that I haven't recognized right away. And when they've identified themselves, then I see it, like, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of us, and then there's a lot of people who are of mixed ethnicity, or I put mixed race in quotations just because race is a social construct and there's only one race, the human race. But whatever, we can, that's a conversation for another day. But who want to kind of feel safe in the identity of being white perceived. And I get that as well. I do not fault them, because it's hard. And if it doesn't feel safe and you want to, be in that identity that is also part of your identity, it's okay to do that as well. Not all of us need to be brutalized or constantly be othered and treated differently if we have the opportunity. Like when I was watching shows or situations from the 50s and 60s when people were white passing and they went through the world as white passing, I don't fault them for that. If it allowed them to live without brutality for a while, then I think it's a win for everybody, because it comes back to that generational trauma. And that's something around the podcast being called Intentional Wellbeing. It's about decolonizing our mindset. It's about understanding what colonization and generational trauma looks like, and unpacking that so that we can have our healing, I hope, and not continue to pass along this trauma to the next generation. There has to be a point. There has to be a part. There has to be a moment when people of color can feel safe in the world. At some point, it has to happen.
Yeah, I think thank you for talking about people who may present as white, or you're not sure, because that's probably, I fit into that category where some people may think, oh, she's white, or, many different, lots of places have said, are you from my country? I'm not. And something
Yeah.
that's really interesting is, I do a lot of research around women who fought back during slavery. And actually, there's one woman called
Mm,
Mary Ellen Pleasant, and she was white passing, and she used her privilege to
hmm.
help and free many enslaved Africans. So outwardly to the
See?
world, she used her privilege to gain a lot of, wealth. She was one of the first millionaires in America. Um, she
Wow.
did a lot of work, and she gained access to the white privileged people. She gained a lot of knowledge, insight, but at all times, the community knew who she was. They knew, actually, yes, she presents
Mm,
as white, but she is African or black. And I think that's really important for, if you're light presenting, to use your privilege, and yes, people may think
mhm.
that you are white. However, um, it's how you are going to navigate the world that's important, and how are you going to use that to help, because actually mixed race people are more part of, especially Black, Caribbean and enslaved communities, that we have been around for hundreds of years, usually due to violence, but many people will have mixed ancestry
Yes,
because of this. So we are kind of like a subset of the community where it's a little bit more complicated, but we
very much so.
we have a little bit more of a duty, actually, I would say, to um, and a responsibility to do what we can, because if we have that light privilege, we're going to have a lot
Hmm.
of things that are easier. So for me, my
Yeah. You're,
principles is, we need to step up where we can, but also realize, yes, we're experiencing extreme trauma. Um, but yeah,
yeah,
I think
exactly.
it's understandable that you may want to not speak your identity and ethnicity in certain situations that are not safe, but in other situations
Yes.
you have a duty. I feel, to say, actually, no,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do what I have to do for my ancestors who maybe didn't have the same opportunities.
Opportunity.
Mm-mm.
100%. And I've had these conversations with a lot of my friends who may present as white, or often have white folks ask them, "What are you?" kind of thing,
Right.
which is so rude. They're a human being. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why that's any of your business, but whatever, human beings are curious. Um, and be a fly in the wall in situations where people aren't sure of your identity, and you can hear what people actually really think because
Right.
they feel like they're in a safe space to speak about their bigotry. And so it must have been interesting, the things that you have heard and how that has affected you, because you too are carrying generational trauma. You too are carrying the violence of people asking you what you are, or people making assumptions and saying things about a certain part of your identity that is usually untrue, or just really horrible, speaks to their own bigotry. So you
Mm-hmm.
must have had to like deal with hearing something that has really, either activated you or made you feel some kind of way, and might not have been able to say, well, actually I'm black, or actually, part of my identity
Mm-hmm.
is black, and
Yeah.
this stuff isn't tolerated with me. Like, don't say these things to me.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. It did happen. It did happen probably a lot more when I was younger, because when you have even less power as a child, and yeah, in them situations you can't
Hmm.
always speak up because it wasn't safe. And actually, where I grew up, there was a lot of violence towards Black, Asian, mixed race people. There was
Yeah.
the National Front. I don't know if you know, that's like a racist English organization that you do not want to be around. So yeah, where I was brought up, it was it was violent. There was a lot of violence, and a lot of things that you would be shocked to hear that as a child you would hear people saying, and just knowing people carried out what they said.
Yeah. That was their intention. And we're seeing the rise of that much more, both in America and Canada. That has in no way gone away. I think it's gone underground for a while. And then given the last few, and I call them regimes, both in Britain, all over the world, the rise of the alt-right has given people who should crawl back under the rock they came from an opportunity to sun themselves on the rock, which is unfortunate. And, dispelling, this garbage, which will never get us anywhere. And so I'm so grateful because you have decided to use your experiences and your life's work to create healing spaces for Black and Indigenous people of color. And so what made you decide to do this? And what does your work entail? Like, how are you creating these spaces? Because this is a big project. There are a lot of people who are really hurting out there, who are really scared, who haven't had a chance to unpack their own trauma and generation. It's a big project you've taken on, but it's a necessary one. And I'm grateful that you carry the torch for that. We need you in our communities.
Thank you. So one of the reasons that I really started Healing Space BIPOC and also the African Spiritual Traditions Instagram page was I was actually unwell for quite a long period of time, and I wasn't really able to do much at all. So I was able to do a very short yoga practice. Certain points I wasn't able to go out, I was too tired to walk. I was pretty much in bed a lot of the time. Certain times I couldn't even read a book because my concentration was so bad. Podcasts were a real, that was one of the things that I could still access. And I just thought these are two things that are really important to me. I was listening to podcasts on African spirituality. I'd had the idea of Healing Space BIPOC for a while, but I think due to the fact that I really wasn't able to do a lot of anything, I thought actually I want to start this off as something positive for me, to be able to connect with other people. I think we were still in the lockdown when I actually started, so it was more of this connection online. And I think I started it because it was for me. I wanted to meet like-minded people because I had taught yoga for several years, but where I live in Northampton, it's mainly white British. So 99% of my students were white British, and we kind of had the lockdown. I had to stop teaching, and it almost seemed like a point of like, okay, should we try something new and different and go in a different direction? And so I started it, and I had generally a very, very good response to starting up the pages and sharing information. There was a few challenging people who were not happy with me doing an African spirituality page because of how I looked, and that triggered some people. And there is a lot of trauma, especially if I understand, but it was actually quite violent towards me. Some of the words were really a lot. I think as a mixed heritage person, I do have that fine line. And for me personally, there is the work that I do, it is community based. It's very free or low charge. I'm using my privilege that I have had time to read, study all these things, and I'm basically giving this all away for free on Instagram because I want others to access this who maybe don't have the time, the resources, and to be able to share. So that's the African spirituality. I've done a few different workshops. We've had like a book group as well that was really interesting. And I've connected with a lot of really amazing people who are like within different spiritual traditions, you know, Caribbean traditions like Obia, hoodoo practitioners from the US. So yeah, it's been really interesting to learn and connect with people. So that's with the African spirituality. The Healing Space BIPOC is, so I do some BIPOC yoga classes. I do some mentoring as well. So if you're a healing spiritual practitioner, we kind of work through some of the issues that we have, you know, selling what we do. And what else? Oh, and then also another thing, it's not technically Healing Space BIPOC, but I am doing a Marrakesh retreat as well, relax and renew. So lots of things going on.
I love that you are incorporating all of these things. And what was interesting to me after what you just spoke, it caught me thinking along the lines of how difficult it is to tread those spaces when people look at you and maybe see the color of your skin or your background and say to you, who are you to be talking about or teaching about African spirituality? And it reminded me when you shared that, I felt a little hurt in my heart because sometimes I feel that those kinds of attitudes are also based in a bit of a colonialism that that only certain people can do certain things. And that's very much a white supremacist attitude on things, that you have the DNA from that part of the world. And though, like, because you're Jamaicans, unless you're indigenous Jamaican, which is a very specific people, the same way as Barbados, there were indigenous Bayesian people that Portuguese killed off, so there's nobody left. I have a tiny bit of their blood in me. My grandma had some, but I mean, it's pretty much that whole group of people have disappeared off the face of the earth. But I have a very strong connection, according to my DNA profile, to Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon. And that's the basis of where all of my DNA, a big chunk of my DNA comes from. You know, just like my DNA is something like, I think I'm 81% from, you know, that part of the Gold Coast of Africa. And then the rest of me is like 3% Irish, 3% Iberian Peninsula, 3% British, you know, like all the places that colonized Barbados, I've got that blood, you know, in me. Right. So, and most people of either Caribbean descent, or African-American descent, most of us have between, and I'm going to make an assumption that's probably true for British West Indian people as well, or British Caribbean people as well, that as much of 25% of our DNA is white. Like, and if that is true, then for white folks, there's some Black DNA in there as well. So nobody, it's a hodgepodge of the transatlantic slave trade and colonization. So we do have a connection to that. And why is it not okay for you to explore that connection? And I felt the same way when Black Panther came out in 2017 and everybody put on a dashiki and went to the movie theater and was so excited to see, although it's not a true representation of an African culture, it's a bit of a made up one, but it's taken elements from all kinds of different.
Yeah, it does actually. When you
from different African, they wanted to include the continent, right? So they didn't pick one particular ethnic group, kind of mixed a lot of these ideas together so that all of us had an opportunity to see ourselves. I love Ryan Coogler and his interpretation of Black Panther. I think it's brilliant. But there were a lot of Africans in Facebook pages saying that now as African Americans, and in my case as African Caribbean Canadian, who are now appropriating African culture because we were putting on these outfits and we didn't understand the history behind them. And I wanted to say to them, we don't understand the history behind them because it was torn from us and we want to be a part of it. We're not wearing it as a costume. we're wearing it out of pride. I think there's a much different thing than to put on a costume and dress up as a person from another culture. Yeah. Halloween is coming, and if you are white or not a person of that culture, don't do it. I'm sad we have to tell you every year, but we got to tell you every year. But but we were doing it out of a sense of excitement and pride, and then this big fight came out around people who are actually African. You might even hear Trevor Daly talk about, I think he's got a stand-up show about African Americans, telling people who are African Americans, you're not actually African. And I get that, but we do have a tie to that, and we want that, which is why we were doing this. And I kind of feel, now I'm making complete assumptions here, and I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I kind of feel your connection to that work is because you are digging deeper into who you are.
Yeah. I'm African. My ancestors are African. That's who they are. It's not. That's, there's no question
your whiteness
about
doesn't cancel that out.
If you are black, you are African descent. And the thing is that we have to remember that colonialism made sure that we pitted ourselves against each other. Okay, and we're saying like, well, you're from Africa,
ding, ding, ding.
You sold all us people off to the Caribbean, and it's all very like down the middle, like you're bad and we're good. Because in Jamaica and the Caribbean, there is actually, this anti-African and African hate of saying, well, why didn't you stop us being sold into slavery? So I'm going to put you all under oppressor. And you didn't come and save us. You didn't fight. You just gave us up. But this is completely false, like history. However, it's been created, the colonization, to, it's always about fighting each other, because if we come together, we're much more powerful. So if you are black, you are African. There is no question about it. Like, it seems ridiculous, to say, oh, African Americans are not African. It's a little catch in the name if it's African American. And I'm laughing, but actually I have to be respectful that some people genuinely have been given the wrong education and information. So they believe it because this is what they have been taught, to hate themselves. Because if you hate Africans, which I have heard it before. I've heard it when I was younger. If you have this disdain for Africans, you have that for yourself, and you actually hate a part of yourself.
Yes.
Even if you don't quite put it together, there is definitely a dissonance and a disassociation that you actually think you're better than somebody who is on the continent, and you're from, and this like Caribbeans against African Americans again, like it's actually ridiculous, because we all have the same. Oh my God! We have the same grannies, cousins. We're all actually connected, and probably from similar families, tribes, all the rest of it. And our people would have been all together. The transatlantic slave trade brought us all together from all different countries, tribes,
everywhere,
religions, and we have to all coexist together and figure out the best way to survive. So we're I think it's that thing of like, we're going to just stop history and you're not going to know your history. That's a part of colonization, just to completely erase Africa from the identity.
Yes.
So yeah, but then also I recognize that actually, yes, I am mixed race, and I do have white British heritage as well. So, I do have more privilege. Yes. That's a fact. And it's how we use that is important, because if a mixed race like person is going to oppress and put down black people, African people, and think they're better, then I don't think they need to have that. They don't need to be embraced by the black community. No. Just like if it's somebody who is black, who is oppressing other black people, which we have everywhere, they do not need to be embraced at all. So yeah, it's
yes, agreed. I have to say that
it makes me really like it's a hard one, because it's so prevalent.
It's hard.
Really prevalent.
Yes, it's so problematic. It's so part of our culture. It's so ridiculous. You know, it's hard to overcome. And it's very much that colonialized mindset. Because I tell folks, I live in Canada right across from Detroit. And when I was in university, I would go over to Detroit and dance in the clubs, right? You know, go out dancing with my friends in the clubs. And I would often have African American men come up to me and go, "Oh, you're an island girl. You think you're better than us?" And I'd be like, "No, I don't. I don't." I'm like, "How could you tell we were from the Caribbean?"
Yeah.
You know, and they would say, "You just have a different," and I'm just like, I don't know what that means.
Right.
And I don't feel that I'm better than you. So I went home and asked my mom about it. And she said, yeah, there's this ridiculous idea between the Caribbean and African Americans that were somehow elevated. And I said, there was slavery in the Caribbean. That is how the British and Britain got as rich as it was and became a superpower from stealing from India and stealing from the continent and colonizing the Caribbean. That's how the royal family has millions of dollars. That's why Britain owns 25% of the landmass of the world that they now have romantically called the Commonwealth, which is really just colonization, like the rewriting of history, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't understand that. Like when African Americans come at me for not being African American and talking about our shared experience of oppression, I have to remind them this is a colonized mindset. When they were ripping us from our families on the continent, they weren't saying to each of us, "Oh, is this your mom? Oh, and is this your dad? Okay. Oh, you're all an ethnic group? Okay, you're all going to Barbados. Oh, you're all an ethnic group. You're all going to South Carolina. Oh, you're all together. You're all going to Britain." We were from different ethnic groups. We were from different tribes. We were from different things that we were just all herded together as one homogeneous people. And then we had to survive. So Caribbean people created that culture to survive. What do we have in common? How do we survive? African Americans created a whole nother culture because how do we band together and how do we survive? And what kills me about all of it is even though we were under this duress and even though this was so hard for us, we created a whole new culture. We had no choice but to come together regardless of our backgrounds and create a whole new culture so that we could survive. And then that culture becomes appropriated and monetized and commodified for white people to benefit from. It kills me. Our music, our food, our style, our clothing, doesn't matter if you're from the islands or if you're from Europe or you're from America, that gets monetized by white folks all the time. And we had to create that from nothing. Many of us can't say, well, my great, 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 great grandfather was from here. We don't know. We don't have that. But if you're like, you know, Irish or Scottish or whatever, you can probably draw a straight line back to the minute your people arrived. You know what I mean? Like, this is amazing to me. So I love that you are teaching African spiritual identities. I love that you are talking to people about this because we need to even deeply unpack our own colonized mind. That's how we get to heal. That's the only way we can heal.
Yeah. And just the thing about the African Americans against the Caribbean, like the Caribbean enslaved Africans, that was not a holiday. The Caribbean as a destination now is a holiday. I've actually read somewhere that somebody said, well, you've got a holiday in the Caribbean. And it's like, I think also this thing of like, oh, well, this slave trade was better than this slave trade, or this person, the people in this country, it was better than this country. Or depending on the work that you did as an enslaved person, it was better. Because I've heard the thing about, you know, if you're darker, you were in the fields, which was worse. If you were lighter, you were in the home.
The paper bag.
And the thing that
the paper bag.
You have to remember is the violence in both was horrific. It was different types of violence, you know, and I won't go into the violence in the home because that's a very triggering discussion. But this thing about it back, you know, at a certain time saying, well, you're in this position, you're in that position, you had it better. Nobody had it better. It was all horrific to varying degrees of horrifying. So that's something that I've
Yeah.
heard. And also the impact on Africa, West Africa, of the transatlantic slave trade. There were people
Mm,
who traded. There was a small percentage, but the damage that was done to West Africa and Central Africa to have so many people stolen from communities, you had warriors stolen, leaders, you had children, women who in the millions they were taken away. So the actual impact on West Africa was horrendous as well. So nobody had a good time. I'm not using, well, yeah, I've
yeah.
seen it was, I've
No,
genuinely
nobody did.
seen the thing that the Caribbean was a bit of a holiday, or it was an immigration, or it was not. It was,
What?
I don't know, but this is the things on the, on the internet that, and actually, maybe somebody doesn't have access to education. They may read something on the internet and they're younger or
I
they
think
don't
it's
have the
true.
access and they might genuinely believe this. So I have to remember not to have that condescending laughing if somebody doesn't know. They genuinely don't
Right. I
know,
get it. Yeah.
and that's part of the process of,
Yeah.
we need to unlearn all that nonsense. And then we've got to start learning, okay, what was the actual truth? We've been told this, that African spirituality is the devil, it's scary, it's,
Right.
we're gonna
Right.
hex you,
It's not.
which you can. I'm not against hexing people that need to be hexed,
Yeah.
but again, it's that self-hatred of like,
So many
we're so scared of what's actually ours. You're scared of your own great grandparents, you're scared of your own
people.
really.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
complex unlearning and healing of it. But I think more people are open these days, which is really positive.
I agree, because I'm finding this fascinating, and I'm going to do some work with you and follow up with some more work with you, because I really do want to unpack this. I have a deep need to know where I come from and who I am. I have a deep need to know why things fire me up, why I get so put out or angry, or why do I feel that this is something I have to do. I have my suspicions about certain political leaders in the United States that I may or may not be related to, because just based on what they look like and what they sound like and what other people in my family look like and sound like, I have some feelings about things. And I want to know. And that's part of my intentional well-being and my bigger healing, is I really want to know who I come from, where I come from, what my, to an extent, what my ancestors had to suffer. And I had somebody like trigger me on my Instagram this past week when this podcast is going to go up during the time that Britain is mourning the monarch, and I'm not mourning them at all, any of it, because they are for me, what Queen Elizabeth II represented for me is the hallmark of colonialism. And I'm tired of folks telling me that, well, she doesn't really have any power and there's nothing that she could do. I don't believe that. She might not have had legal power.
And she was the richest woman in the whole entire world. That's quite a lot of power that she had.
Yes. It is quite a lot of power. It's not legal. I can't tell you how I've had many people roll into my DMs or write on messages on the post that I made about the atrocities of India, of Ireland, of the continent, at the hands of the British monarchy and the creators of colonialism and the true history. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me and said, well, she doesn't have any power and I wish you would take that down and all that stuff. I'm thinking, what do you mean? She might not have had legal authority over anything, but she had massive wealth and legal authority.
And she had to give the royal assent of approval over every single law. So if she didn't pass a law, she was the final say on every single law in our country. And I'm guessing, I don't know.
So people are lying to me
she literally did.
And people are lying to me then.
She had a lot of power. She really did. And to say that she didn't, from a legal, yes, she did. She really, she did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. People are like, take that post down. It's not true. I'm like, until you prove it's not true, up
yeah.
it stays. Because it was an educator's breaking down why people are mourning
Hmm.
what, and not allowing Black, brown people and other European people who were brutalized by colonialism and the current system in place, not allowing them to have their own reaction to her death, and demanding everybody be
Hmm.
respectful because she's a 96-year-old woman, and how dare you. And it's always amazing to me that old white women get a pass on everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, the problem is she wasn't 96 forever. She just had her platinum jubilee, did she not? So she sat on the throne for 70 years. There's so much she could have done. She never acknowledged colonialism. She never acknowledged the harm that it caused, or slavery, or
Hmm.
nothing. And she even had the power that when people from the Commonwealth, or countries from the Commonwealth, wanted to break away, she had the power to encourage
Hmm.
them not to. So I'm sure, I don't understand why all of a sudden, because I've never been into the royal family.
No.
I always would call them the Lucky Sperm Club.
Mm-mm.
Like what do you do? Like, what do you do? I don't understand what the point of
Yeah,
your
take our
existence
taxpayers'
is. It
money.
seems
That's
like
what
an
she does.
old,
She did, and pay for her
exactly.
very large
She's like, well,
family,
now her son
very, very large family. She was the ultimate. So in the UK, we have this thing about benefits. People who get benefits who don't work, they're so demonized. They get a very small amount of money, but she was really, doing no work but receiving lots and lots of wealth. So yeah,
the people who tell me she was dutiful and she took her duty, and I keep saying duty to
yeah,
do
and
what
duty to
exactly? To
who
uphold white
as well.
supremacy? Because that's the way I see it.
Yeah, it was to certain
Yeah, duty
people.
to
Who
who?
was
Yeah,
it? Who was her
exactly.
duty to? It wasn't to people like us. It definitely wasn't.
No,
Mm-mm.
no. They could care less about people like that.
And also,
And to have people tell me they no longer respect me, and
yeah,
because I'm not
but
mourning the
also it's
queen,
the thing with her son
there's the
as
door.
well,
Get out.
Prince Andrew, that we can't forget that she used
Oh, I
millions of
know.
pounds of taxpayers' money to pay off this woman who was abused by him. So I think the reaction to the Queen, I've been thinking about this, is it really says a lot about British culture. That it is a culture of silence. It is a culture
Yes,
of sweeping things under the carpet.
yes,
It is about respectability and
yes.
not at all about accountability. We do not have that culture here. And that family dynamic that
Or
she
here.
has, I'm sure you're going to see a similar family dynamic across the country, where you have people in power who make all the decisions. You may have people within that structure who are abusive. I'm going to say it, that's what was going on, who
Mm-hmm.
people will not say anything. They will not challenge. It
Mm-hmm.
is the culture of silence.
Of course.
And yeah, it's very telling that actually, if somebody dies, you have respect for the
Yeah.
dead, but you don't have to gain that respect. It's not through your actions, it's through how polite you were and how respectability. That's
Respectability
really
politics.
one of the most important
Mm-hmm.
things of English culture that I'm a part of. That as long as
Yes.
you say it with a smile through gritted teeth, it's okay. It's very
Mm-hmm.
passive. We have a very passive aggressive culture, and
Aggressive.
as long as it's with a smile and as long
Yes.
as you don't say too much, it's okay. You can just about get away with it. But if you do it with emotion, if you do it with passion and outrage is not allowed here, because then you will be
No. No.
pushed
It's
out.
the stiff,
But yeah, this is the culture that we live in.
stiff
Yeah,
upper lip.
yeah,
Stiff
yeah.
upper lip.
We
Yep.
have a big issue,
Amazing.
big problems.
So big problems. And it doesn't allow people to heal,
No,
to tell, if you don't allow people
no.
their truth and you don't allow people their representation. You can't you don't get to heal. You don't get in a moment for intentional well-being, because you now have to unpack all your own trauma and figure it out, and then have people tell you to get over it, or people deny it altogether, or people gaslight you altogether. So tell me about your spaces. Tell me about your healing space for BIPOC. Tell me, what are some of the things you do within that space to help people find their way to intentional well-being?
Within the group work that I do, so whether it's the African spirituality or within the yoga class, there is the part about sharing. So, you know, we each have the opportunity to share from our own truth and have our own voice, because when we get in spaces that are mixed, we tend to feel silenced. We tend to feel it can be very daunting to really share your truth in a mixed situation. So when I say mixed, this is white and BIPOC. And a lot of people in the sessions have said, yeah, I feel that way. That's something that I know. That's something that I experience, but they haven't ever necessarily verbalized it or said it to other people. And there's great healing when you share in safe spaces and you're listened to. And I think that sharing, it definitely opens up a lot of things that people are scared to talk about. So it could be, I think with the African spirituality, for example, it could be like maybe the religious trauma of being taught to hate and fear African spirituality. And that's a common thing, sadly, that there's a lot of trauma, around that. But when we share our stories, I think it's healing. And that's a part of African spirituality and African tradition, that you share, you do storytelling. There is a point in the story where you can, hear the challenges, but hear people overcome the challenges as well. So it's kind of taking it full circle, and we can see ourselves within the story and within the narrative, and not outside looking in, and we can be centered, which is it's a unique experience when we're in a BIPOC or Black African group. Our stories are actually centered, and it's like, wow, it just doesn't happen. We don't have to explain. We don't have to, make all the, how's this going to be taken? Is this going to be dismissed? Is it, there's always that thing that you're never quite sure what the other, if it's in a mix, you just don't know. And it's like, can I take this risk? And people feel like they can take more of a risk when it's a safer community. So that's one aspect of sharing. And also, so within my yoga classes, the course is about radical rest and reclaiming autonomy over our bodies and our minds. And last night we were discussing, some of the harmful things about, the more marginalized you are, the more you're expected to work and earn your rest, and you don't want to be seen as lazy. The stereotypes, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much as your white.
Half as far.
Yeah, so it's a lot of, I suppose it's like reclaiming what's ours, and then opening up and saying, actually, do you know what? This has been a struggle of mine, and I haven't been sure where to go. But then once we open that dialogue, that's where we can find that healing. And I have people that come along and they share from their knowledge, but then also me hearing from other people, that heals me at the same time. So it's slightly more egalitarian than if you were in a mixed space, I think.
The things that I'm jotting things down as you're saying them, because I want to put them in the show notes, but what I'm hearing you say is the power of collective healing and community healing that helps each and every one of us, and to create these brave spaces to speak your truth and not have to worry that you're going to be gaslit, dismissed. There's something very magical for us to be centered instead of being the afterthought. And I'm watching a lot of young women and young little girls heal. The trailer dropped for the new Disney movie, the live action Disney movie of Ariel. And of course, there's a lot of very strangely middle-aged white men having a heart attack over Ariel not
Very
being
strange.
a white redheaded person, which in the Hans, it's very strange. I don't know why they're watching this movie, but in the Hans Christian Andersen original, the mermaid is green and is a siren that calls people to their death. So a lot of people have taken liberties with the story and made it something else. So if you really want to go back to the original, that's what you're wanting to go back to. But it's clear that they don't know the history of Hans Christian Andersen and what he intended in that story. And there's a deeper message behind that one that you all can do a little research around, some identity stuff for Hans Christian Andersen. But I've been posting the pictures of young girls seeing Ariel for the first time to counter that other narrative, and watching the tears in some of their eyes and I'm getting emotional now, and being excited that she's Black. Because when are we centered in those kinds of stories? Like when Miles Morales came out as the Black Spider-Man, my son was 15, the same age as Miles Morales. And we sat in the movie theater and my kids were silent and riveted to this because they too could be Spider-Man. Right. And the pushback of these characters that are fictional, which tells you anybody can reside in that space. And to center that space is what you're doing, is to have people have, like, I just got emotional hearing you say about it. And then I just got emotional talking about it. That's my trauma coming to the surface. That's me working through that feeling. And that's me being heard and seen. Yeah. And it's so important. I'm glad you're doing this. I'm glad you didn't get scared off, because I'm sure people came for you.
It's scary. Yeah.
I'm glad that
scary.
Didn't deter you.
It can be challenging, and I'm
glad.
Wobble and wonder what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? I could do something maybe easier, but this is my this is what I have to do. This is
Dharma.
This is what I have to do. Yeah.
And why do you feel this is what you have to do? Because I love to hear people's stories, what rivets them. I call it, a come to your power moment. This is where I'm supposed to be. This, regardless of people coming at me for no good reason, this is where I'm supposed to be.
So my feeling is that it's an ancestral calling to do this work, because some of my ancestors were silenced and could never do anything like this. It was illegal to be in community. They weren't allowed to come together. They were not able to speak their truth. And I know deep in my heart that many of them tried to speak up and they were harmed. So it's almost like I'm taking the torch of the work that was started and disrupted at different times, because obviously people, some people were able to move forward, but I know certain experiences that I've had, ancestral work, I know that people were silenced and stopped, and it feels like I just know in my bones that I have to do it, and it's not the easiest. And I think that's when you know it's your true calling, because you could probably do something easier and not as difficult.
Absolutely.
And so I know it's ancestral, but I think for me as well, it's me reclaiming my voice and actually saying, no, this is important to me, and I'm going to speak about it regardless of what other people think, and keep going as best I can.
And keep going. And I'm glad that you're out there. I feel very much in community with you, because I feel exactly the same way about the work I do. And I'm grateful to have come into community with you. And I'm grateful to see the rise of powerful Black and brown women speaking their truth and standing up and saying, now is the time, and we won't be angered or rattled by, you know, bigots and white supremacists. And we are not our ancestors. You cannot silence us. Yeah. We are not our ancestors.
We have more safety.
Silence us. The power dynamic has shifted, which is why you're terrified. Yeah.
We have more safety now. We do. We're for our ancestors. They couldn't do it before because, you know, male domination. I now have autonomy. We earn our own money. We can be on a platform, you know, that wasn't around. So we have that safety to carry on the torch and say, this is the next step. This is the next level of healing, isn't it?
It is. Mm-hmm. It is. And I think I'm going to stop us right there because I think that's where it is, that level of healing, so we can get to that intentional well-being. Emma, I could talk to you for hours and hours, and I'm feeling very activated and emotional in a good way by this conversation. And I always need to come back and talk to other brown and Black people whenever I'm feeling some kind of way or I'm feeling alone in this conversation. It's really important to have those touchstones. And for you, you've been a really great touchstone for me, which is why I've had you on the podcast. I'm grateful we met. I think it was 2017. Like I said, everything blends together. I'm grateful we met at not Tri Yoga. We met at Indaba Yoga all those years ago. And I'm grateful that we had that opportunity to meet and to connect. And I'm grateful for the work you're doing in the community. You're healing us and you're allowing us to create a space, a brave space to heal, which is integral to our well-being. So tell us what's coming up for you. Where can people find you? And don't worry, everybody, I'm going to put this in the show notes. Do you have any books that you recommend folks be reading? Where can we find you? How can we connect?
So I think a book I'd like to recommend is Jaya John and Freedom Words for Your Brave Revolution. I think I've got the title correct, but that is a really amazing book. Jaya John is just amazing. So things that I have coming up. So I have, I do mixed yoga classes online where you can find me at yogawithemmakelly.com. And then I have some BIPOC yoga, which is healing_space_BIPOC. And then I have African_spiritual_traditions. And the Marrakesh retreat is open to all.
Okay.
And you can find it on all of them platforms, the Marrakesh retreat.
Nice.
And also, just this is going away a little bit, but I'm actually going to West Africa in a few weeks' time. I've been offered a full scholarship to the Ivory Coast. So I'm going for it's African drumming, African dancing, and I'm really looking forward to that. I can't wait. Yay.
I want to go with you. So how long will you be gone?
So I'm like so excited to be going on this trip, and you know, I'll be sharing photos and maybe not me dancing though. My dancing is terrible.
Perfect. When you get on the continent, your ancestors will find you and bring you right back into the mix.
I think the white ancestors take over when it comes to dancing.
I don't know. I think once you get on the continent, something might change. Thank you for your talk today. I'm so grateful to know you. Thanks for being a part of our intentional well-being and giving us tips, abilities, and spaces for our own healing. You are amazing, Miss Emma. And I'm grateful to be in community with you and to call you friend and mentor.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be invited, and it's been amazing to meet you all them years ago. I'm sure you've ignited that kind of thinking about how we can create community. So your